She waited 34 years in silence. No one knew her name, until the billionaire walked up to her and whispered, "Mom." What happened next made the whole country cry. On the 27th floor of a steel and glass tower overlooking San Francisco Bay, Colton Hayes had everything most people could only dream of: billions in company assets, control of the most influential AI firm on the West Coast, and a name that commanded respect in every boardroom. But on the inside, Colton carried a silence that never left him. He had always been told he was adopted, that his biological mother had abandoned him outside a fire station. It was said like a fact, like a wound dressed in logic. His adoptive parents, especially his father, never spoke of her except with disdain. "Some people just don't want their kids," his father once said coldly over breakfast when Colton was 15. "You were lucky we found you." That sentence haunted him like a ghost. When Colton's adoptive father, Charles Hayes, died of a heart attack at 68, Colton mourned, but not with his soul. The funeral was pristine, cold, efficient, like the man had lived. But it was the reading of the will that unearthed the first secret. Hidden beneath a drawer in Charles's mahogany desk was a thick envelope. No label, no stamp, only Colton's name, written in a slanted, unfamiliar hand. Inside, adoption documents and a photo. It was old, faded. A woman in her early 20s holding a newborn, her eyes red but full of love. On the back, in the same slanted handwriting, "To my son, born from pain but loved more than life. Forgive me, Naomi Hart." Naomi Hart. Not a ghost, not a monster, a mother. That name shattered the story Colton had carried for 34 years. Colton Hayes wasn't a man who believed in signs. But for the first time in his life, he felt something unshakable stir inside him, a magnetic pull that went deeper than logic. Naomi Hart. The name haunted his mind like a melody long forgotten. He started with what he had: the photo, the handwriting, the adoption records. His assistant, Mia, a fiercely loyal woman who had worked for him since his early startup days, was the first person he told. "I need to find her," Colton said, pushing the photo across the table. "She might be alive." Mia didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and began making calls. The adoption agency had long since closed. The hospital where he was born no longer had records from that far back. No phone number, no forwarding address, no trace of Naomi Hart in any of the national databases. But Mia found a lead: a tiny handwritten note in a scanned archive from a Catholic shelter in Oakland, dated 1989. It mentioned Naomi Hart, 22, with an infant son. After that, Mia sighed. She disappears. Colton flew in private to Oakland the next morning. The shelter had turned into a women's resource center, managed by a no-nonsense woman named Sister Claire. "I remember Naomi," the nun said. "She was quiet, broken. She left one night in the rain and never came back." "Did she say where she was going?" "She said something like, 'I'm going to disappear. I don't want him to think I didn't love him.'" Colton froze. For weeks, Colton and his team expanded their search. Hospitals, shelters, employment records, even surveillance footage of local soup kitchens. Some nights he roamed San Francisco's streets alone, dressed in old jeans and a hoodie, asking around like any other volunteer. She'd be in her 50s now, he'd say to the staff at shelters. "Name's Naomi. Brown eyes, gentle voice." She liked to hum old gospel hymns. Nothing. Until one cold, brittle morning in the Mission District, Colton saw her. She was seated on a crate near a closed laundromat, wrapped in tattered layers. Her hands trembled as she sipped from a styrofoam cup. Her eyes, those eyes, were the same as in the photograph. He couldn't move at first. Then he approached slowly, heart hammering in his chest. "Ma'am," he said gently. She looked up. Something flickered. "I'm sorry, I don't have money," she whispered. "I'm not here for money," Colton said, kneeling in front of her. His voice cracked. I think you're my mother." Her cup fell. Naomi stared at him in silence. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she blinked, once, twice, and the dam broke. "You're him?" she whispered. "You survived?" Colton nodded, tears already escaping. "You were just a baby. I had nothing. They told me if I loved you, I'd let you go. And you did," Colton said, choking. "You saved me." She covered her face and wept into her hands. He sat beside her on the pavement, unbothered by the stares of strangers passing by. They sat there for a long time, mother and son, side by side on a sidewalk where fate had led them back together. In the weeks that followed, Colton brought Naomi home. Doctors treated her malnutrition and early-stage kidney disease. A therapist helped her process the trauma of years spent unseen. Colton visited every day. They cooked together. She told stories of his father, a jazz saxophonist who died in a construction accident weeks before Colton was born. She showed him a tiny bracelet she had kept for over 3 decades. "I prayed every year on your birthday," she whispered. "I didn't know if you were alive." Colton kissed her forehead. "You never stopped being my mother." Rumors swirled online. The tech CEO helping a homeless woman. Tabloids speculated it was an affair or publicity stunt. One morning, Colton stood on the steps of his company headquarters. "This woman," he said, holding Naomi's hand, "is not a stranger. She is my birth mother. And the only reason I'm alive today is because of her sacrifice." Silence. Then applause. Colton bought her a small cottage by the bay. Every morning, they had tea and watched the fog roll in. Naomi painted watercolors again. Her laughter returned, softer but real. One night, as they sat watching the stars, she said quietly, "Thank you for finding me." Colton took her hand. "Thank you for never letting me go." 1 year had passed since the day Colton found Naomi on that cold sidewalk. Gone were the tattered clothes and whispered apologies. Naomi Hart now walked with steadier steps, her face no longer shaded by shame. Her cottage by the bay had become a place of quiet peace. She painted again, her watercolors filled with skies, saxophones, and sometimes the silhouette of a fire station door. Colton came by nearly every evening, often leaving behind boardroom stress to help her cook, clean, or just sit on the porch swing. "I didn't think I'd live to see a second spring," Naomi said once. "You'll see many more," Colton replied. One morning, Naomi sat across from a young journalist, Carmen Brooks, who worked for a progressive human interest news site. Carmen's voice was soft. "We're doing a story on hidden mothers, women who gave up their children due to impossible choices." Naomi hesitated. "I'm not proud of what I did." "You should be," Carmen said. "You loved him enough to let him go." Naomi agreed to the interview. 2 weeks later, the article went viral. The CEO's real mother was sleeping in the cold until he found her. Thousands commented. Many praised the story, but not all. "She's just using his fame. Where was she when he was hungry as a kid? Bet she's milking this." Colton read the comments late one night. His jaw tightened. It happened at a charity gala hosted by a Fortune 100 company. Colton had been invited to speak. He brought Naomi along, her first major public appearance. As they entered, murmurs spread. "She's the mother? She doesn't belong here. Look at those shoes." Naomi, though dressed simply and beautifully, kept her eyes low. Her hands trembled. Colton took the stage. "They say my mother doesn't belong here. I say this place never deserved her." Silence. "This is the woman who birthed me, loved me in silence, and chose my life over her pride. If you think her value lies in the shoes she wears, then maybe you're the ones out of place." A pause. Then thunderous applause. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. One autumn afternoon, a package arrived at Naomi's cottage. No sender, no markings, except her name, carefully written. Inside, a tattered envelope, a photo, and a letter. She gasped. Colton found her sitting on the floor, clutching the letter like it was made of gold. "It's from him," she said. "From Elijah." "Elijah?" Colton asked. "Your father." The letter, dated 1990, had never reached her. It had been found behind a church wall during renovations. "Naomi, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. But I want you to know, Colton is my son, no matter where he ends up. Don't ever let the world convince you he wasn't worth it. He is. You both are." Colton read it aloud, voice shaking. That night, they lit a candle in Elijah's memory. Naomi placed the photo on the mantle, her, Elijah, and baby Colton. A family, fractured by time, made whole by love. Colton created a scholarship fund in Naomi's name, the Hart Grant, for single mothers pursuing art and education. Each year, Naomi now speaks at the award ceremony. Her voice still trembles, but it carries. "I am not a tragedy," she told the crowd one night. "I am proof that love waits, survives, and finds its way home." Naomi Hart never asked to be seen. For most of her life, she had learned to walk quietly, survive invisibly. But fate, wrapped in the arms of a son she thought she'd lost, had other plans. It was Colton who submitted the nomination. Quietly, privately, without even telling Naomi. Months later, an official letter arrived from the White House. You are invited to Washington, D.C., to be honored at the national ceremony for extraordinary civil sacrifice and maternal courage. Naomi's hands trembled. They must have made a mistake. They didn't, Colton said, smiling. They're finally seeing you, Mom. Naomi had never been on a plane. As she boarded with Colton, holding her small leather bag and a sketchbook she hadn't opened in years, she kept whispering, "This isn't real." But the skies were real. The seat next to her, warm from her son's presence, was real. And the way strangers turned to admire her natural grace, real. In D.C., she stayed at a historic hotel where portraits of presidents lined the halls. That night, Colton helped her rehearse her short speech. She only had to say a few words, but she practiced for hours. "I want to get it right," she said, "for all the mothers who never got to speak." The stage was set beneath a dome of lights. Cameras flashed. Celebrities and senators filled the velvet chairs. Then came her name. And our final honoree tonight, a woman whose love once walked away from her arms, but never from her soul. Naomi Hart. Applause thundered. Naomi stood slowly, hands shaking, and walked with grace toward the podium. She looked out, saw Colton in the crowd, eyes brimming. "I was told for years that I had failed," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "But a mother never fails when she chooses love." She paused. The crowd was breathless. "I gave up my son, but I never stopped loving him. And he never stopped finding his way back." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Tonight isn't about me. It's about every mother who ever had to choose pain for the sake of love." Standing ovation. Even the president wiped his eyes. In the weeks after, Naomi received over 10,000 letters. A teacher from Alabama wrote, "You made me brave enough to tell my class I had a son I placed for adoption." A mother in Nevada said, "I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm part of something bigger." Colton built a digital archive called the Mother's Project, where women could share their hidden stories. Naomi read every message. She cried, she prayed, and she wrote back. Her name became a whisper of comfort in shelters, clinics, prison letters, and courtrooms. They called her Mom Naomi. One afternoon, Colton brought home a surprise. A painting. Naomi, seated by a window, sketchbook in lap, light pouring in behind her like a halo. The caption, "The Woman Who Waited." Colton hung it in her living room. She stared at it long, then said softly, "That's not just me. It's all the mothers who waited," he replied. Naomi smiled. "Then let it hang forever." And it did. Naomi's final winter came quietly. It began with a little tiredness, then pain in her back, and eventually, after the tests, an unspoken understanding between her and the doctors. Stage for cancer. Inoperable. She had only a few months. She didn't cry. Not once. When Colton found out, he left a board meeting mid-sentence and drove straight to her cottage. She was sitting by the window, sketchbook on her knees, drawing the trees without leaves. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. She looked up, smiled softly. "Because I'm not afraid." He sat beside her. "You gave me life twice, Colton. Once with your birth, and once with your return. That's more than most mothers ever get." Naomi didn't want hospitals or machines. She asked to stay home, in her little cottage by the bay. So Colton hired a private team of nurses and therapists who treated her like royalty. Each day, Naomi wrote letters, to mothers, to women, to children she never met. Colton collected them all in a box marked, "To the Ones Who Wait." He also noticed something strange. Naomi had begun recording audio messages. Late at night, he'd hear her voice in the study, gentle and warm, telling stories of strength, of forgiveness, of love. When asked, she only smiled. Just preparing a gift. It was February 12th. Rain tapped softly on the roof. Naomi, now weak and barely able to sit, asked Colton to bring her sketchbook and one sheet of paper. With trembling hands, she drew one last thing. A heart held together by two hands, one aged, one youthful. She wrote underneath, "Love returns. Always." That night, she slept with her hand in his. She passed just before dawn, as the fog rolled gently over the bay. Colton didn't let go for a long time. At her memorial, hundreds gathered, activists, artists, politicians, and people from shelters across the country. But Colton had one more surprise. He walked to the podium. Before my mother passed, she asked me to share something. He pressed play. Naomi's voice, recorded weeks before, echoed through the speakers. If you're hearing this, it means I've gone. But don't cry for me. I was loved, I was found, and I was free. My name was Naomi Hart, and I am the mother of a miracle. No one moved. No one breathed. And then applause. Long endless. 6 months later, Colton opened the Naomi Center, a haven for women in crisis, offering shelter, art therapy, childcare, and education. On the main wall, her final sketch. He also launched a podcast called Letters from Naomi, sharing her voice, her wisdom, her pain, and her joy. It became one of the most listened to series in the country. And each year, on February 12th, he returns to the Bay. He brings tea for two. He opens her last letter. And he whispers, love returned. And stayed.